5 mysterious forensic cases that baffled experts. Forensics has come a long way. Now we can identify the cause of death, build a profile of the criminal from a single piece of fiber, hair, or even just a tiny amount of blood. But there are some cases that still slip through the cracks and makes us wonder what really happened. These are 5 mysterious forensic cases that baffled experts. Number 5. Angelina and Debora Logue. It was the 4th of July in 1974. The Logue sisters, 7-year-old Angelina and 4-year-old Debora, spent the entire afternoon in their aunt's swimming pool in Long Island, New York. By the afternoon, the girls were tired and decided to take a nap, but just an hour in from sleeping, Angie went into a coma and died. Then Debbie began failing as well. She went into a coma too, staying alive for 9 days before eventually passing away on July 13th. In the next 2 weeks, experts were contacted one by one to hopefully shed light on what happened to the girls. Dozens of pathologists, public health experts, detectives, toxicologists, and more worked on the case trying to crack it. Even though the young girls' tissue samples were analyzed, including the fluids from their bodies, experts couldn't find any toxic chemicals. There was no presence of harmful organisms as well. During the initial investigation, one theory for the cause of deaths was that the girls inhaled a chemical substance called chlordane. Chlordane is an insecticide used during house fumigations. The Logues had a neighbor whose house was being treated for termites, and many wondered if they had somehow got into the home, inhaled the chemicals, or maybe accidentally touched them. But experts later said there was no trace of that chemical found in their bodies. Angelina and Debora are 2 of 7 Logue children. They are the daughters of Mr. Logue from a previous marriage, along with 2 others. On the day of the incident, the girls got out of the pool at 6 p.m. to get ready for dinner. Angie said she felt tired and stretched out along the concrete perimeter of the water. She was later moved to a lounge chair and covered in a pool towel so she could sleep. Debbie also laid down on another lounge chair across the other side of the pool. At 7 p.m., Mr. Logue arrived. It was around this time when Mrs. Logue came out to check on the girls. She said Angie looked funny. By this time, the little girl was pale, and one pupil was dilated while the other was constricted to a pinpoint. Mrs. Logue lifted her up to carry her, and Angie's body quivered with an orange foam coming out of her mouth. There were also signs of blood on her nose. Emergency services were called and she was rushed to the hospital. Then someone noticed Debbie's condition was also faltering and she was rushed to the hospital too. Angie's heart stopped beating just minutes before reaching the hospital. Debbie was getting weaker and everything else was done to help save her, but she still succumbed to the same death as her sister. Aside from testing samples from the girls, experts also examined the Logue home, the pool area, and any other place for possible poison or other items that may have caused the girls' deaths. But despite all of this, the case of what happened to the Logue girls still remains a mystery, even today. Number 4. How John Schneeberger fooled DNA tests. On the evening of October 31st in 1992, a single mother named Candace, sometimes referred to as Candy, walked into the office of John Schneeberger in the small town of Kipling, Saskatchewan, Canada. When she woke up, she knew something wasn't right. She felt like she had been raped. John was a well-loved doctor in the small town of Kipling. He was happily married, had kids, including one stepdaughter, and was believed to be an overall wonderful man. Candace reported the assault, provided DNA samples from semen taken from her underwear on the night in question. John was asked to provide a blood sample for comparison, but when the blood was tested, it didn't match the DNA from the semen. When news came out it didn't match, Candace couldn't believe it. She ended up facing backlash from the community, and people claimed she was just looking for a money grab. The doctor's wife, Lisa, even called her a slut on TV. Schneeberger maintained that he only administered the drug Versed to Candace, and that it's possible it may have caused her to have delusions of a sexual act. But Candace never gave up. The following year, she asked for the test to be repeated and then asked for a third test. All of the results didn't match the DNA of the suspect. Candace, still convinced she was raped by the doctor, hired a private investigator. This investigator obtained DNA using Schneeberger's chapstick. A private lab then compared the DNA, and it was in fact a match. But since the DNA from the doctor was illegally obtained, the case would not hold up in court. Then suddenly, Lisa Schneeberger made a shocking revelation in 1997 and turned against her once beloved husband, John. She found out her husband had repeatedly drugged and assaulted her daughter. She was only 13 during the initial assault. Lisa reported it to the police and provided evidence, including a hidden box filled with drugs, condoms, and syringes belonging to her husband. The RMCP once again collected a blood sample, but they weren't taking any chances this time. They also took samples of saliva and hair, and instead of pulling blood from his arms, they took it from the tips of his fingers. When this blood was tested, it matched the DNA sample taken from the semen. During his trial in 1999, Schneeberger finally revealed how he tricked forensics the first few times. Anticipating what would happen, he surgically inserted a small plastic tube filled with a male patient's blood on his arm. So every time the technician drew blood, they were taking it from the tube and not his body. Hence, he was able to fool everyone into thinking his DNA didn't match that of the rapist. Schneeberger was found guilty of the crime and was sentenced to just 6 years in prison. He was stripped of his medical license, but after he got out, it was as if nothing had happened. The town welcomed him back. Despite his wife's protests, he even won back a chance to see his biological daughters. In the end, he was deported back to South Africa, where he was originally from, because he failed to disclose in his immigration papers that he was being investigated for rape. Once there, he tried to get back into the medical business, but by then, he was known as Dr. Rape. He ended up moving back in with his mother and going into the catering industry. No one knows what he's doing currently. Number 3. Exonerated by a dog's hair. Sante Tribble was only 17 years old when he was arrested for armed robbery and the murder of a cab driver in Washington, D.C. There were no direct witnesses, only allegations. Despite providing a solid alibi that he wasn't in the area during the crime, which 6 others corroborated, he was still found guilty by the jury. One of the reasons they believed he was the criminal was because an FBI analysis testified in court that hairs found from a stocking mask, which the suspect was said to be wearing during the crime, matched in all microscopic characteristics with that of Tribble. The expert then went on to say that there was a 1 chance in 10 million that the hair would belong to anyone else other than Tribble. With that statement, his fate was sealed. Tribble was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years to life by a jury after only 40 minutes of deliberation. For decades, Tribble endured the harsh prison life. At some point during his incarceration, he was subjected to solitary confinement for long stretches, the longest of which was 9 months. But finally, after 28 years, an independent analysis discovered the testimony provided by the forensics expert was completely inaccurate. In fact, out of the 13 hair samples taken from the stocking mask belonging to the killer, none of them genetically matched Tribble's. Even worse, not all of the hairs were even human. One of them was from a dog, and this wasn't distinguished at all by the original forensic expert. It was revealed that over 95% of the cases that involved hair evidence, which the FBI reviewed, had contained a flawed testimony. This was 257 out of 268 cases. By flaws, it means the FBI experts offered testimony that exceeded the limits of science. Tribble was then released and officially exonerated. A judge ordered the city of Washington, D.C. to pay him $13.2 million in damages. Number 2. Michael Swango. Michael Swango grew up excelling at a lot of things. He was considered smart beyond his years and was always involved in extracurricular activities outside of classes. In 1972, he graduated valedictorian in high school and had a full-ride scholarship to college. He enlisted in the Marines for 2 years before returning to Quincy College, then Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Once there, his classmates noticed that even though he was a brilliant student, Swango was odd. He was described as being highly competitive. They jokingly called him 00 Swango, saying he had a license to kill because of the way he treated death and his mishandling of cadavers. Swango then went on to become a neurosurgery resident at Ohio State University Medical Center. Soon after, nurses complained about their patients mysteriously dying whenever Swango was around. At least one nurse caught him injecting something into a patient, but little to no investigation was done and the nurses were told they were being paranoid. This scenario would repeat over the course of 12 years as Michael jumped from one hospital to the next. Hospital administrators knew that he was doing something wrong, but they always refused to investigate further. Looking back at his crimes, there were multiple times when there was overwhelming evidence that Swango had killed a patient directly, at least enough to charge him, but for a long time, nothing was ever done. In one instance, a 22-year-old woman who was simply having intestinal problems took an injection from Swango. Before administering the drug, the doctor told the patient's mother to leave the room. She protested and a brief argument followed, but she eventually relented and stepped out. Swango then gave the patient a shot, then stepped out, telling the patient's mother with a smirk, "She's dead now." Although the woman filed a report with the hospital, again no action was taken against him. At one point, when Swango had started working as a paramedic at Adams County Ambulance Service in Quincy, Illinois, one coworker remembers Swango bringing donuts. Afterward, one by one, the workers started vomiting and feeling sick. Hours later, one worker received a call from Swango asking him how he felt, including asking him to describe the pain specifically and if he thought he was going to die. It creeped him out, of course, and soon they began to suspect Swango was poisoning them. So the workers devised a plan by leaving a pitcher of water where Swango would be left alone with it. When they later took that water and examined it, it was filled with arsenic. They told police about this, and in turn, authorities led an investigation into Swango's home. There they found a multitude of poisons, including ricin, ant poison, and pesticides. He was arrested and incarcerated for 5 years in 1985, but released for good behavior. After he got out, he was free to do as he pleased once again. It would take several more years before Swango was finally arrested and imprisoned for life. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder in 2000, and he was sentenced to serve 3 consecutive life sentences. A book about him, written by James B. Stewart, estimates he killed more than 60 people during his crime spree. Number 1. The poison that killed Kim Jong-nam. It felt like the story was plucked out of a movie. A dictator's brother arrives at a Malaysian airport on February 13, 2017. There, he was approached by a female from behind who rubbed something on his face, particularly his nose and eyes. The man reported the unusual incident to the airport police. He was then escorted by authorities to the airport clinic. But within 20 minutes of the incident, the man suffered a seizure, and on the way to the hospital, he died. This individual who died was Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Days after the incident, the questions began pouring in, and suspicion fell on North Korea. Initially, no one knew what kind of chemical could cause such a violent and immediate death without affecting the woman who deployed or applied it. As the investigation carried on and an autopsy was conducted on his body, it was discovered he was killed with VX, a banned toxic nerve agent. It was initially created as an insecticide, but the makers realized it was effective as a weapon as well. It was later developed and shared to other countries, but because of its lethal capacity, it was immediately banned. VC is considered one of the deadliest substances on Earth. It is tasteless and odorless and kills by causing uncontrollable muscle contractions, then ultimately stops the breathing. What's so deadly about it is its potency. It only requires 10 milligrams of the substance to come in contact with the skin, which is just a single drop to potentially kill a person. Back in 1994 and 95, the deadly Japanese cult Aum Shinrikyo used a homemade version of VX to attack and kill people. Normally, VX is an oily liquid with the consistency of honey. It can also be sprayed or be in aerosol form to serve as nerve gas. In Jong Nam's case, he was smeared with VC in its liquid form. Aside from being so potent, it can also easily be mixed using only 2 chemicals. It's believed since the woman was unaffected by the drug, it's possible the chemicals were combined right at the airport using a binary concoction, chemicals that were non-lethal on their own before it mixed on the victim's face. The woman who smeared the chemicals was arrested, and they said they thought it was going to be a harmless prank for a TV show. They were also shown to have rushed to the bathroom after performing the attack. It took a while for authorities to find out the man who was killed was Kim Jong-nam, since his passport showed the pseudonym Kim Chol. When Jong-nam's backpack was later searched, it revealed something unusual. He was carrying $124,000 in cash and was found with 8 national currencies as well as North Korean passports. Even more, he had 12 vials of atropine, the antidote to the VX poison he was given. But who would kill Kim Jong-nam? Of course, the first suspicion fell on dictator Kim Jong-un. It's been discovered there had been 2 attempts on Jong-nam's life, one in 2010 and the other in 2012. Then there's the possibility it might have been China that had killed him. However, sources on the inside say China is as shocked by the killings as much as anyone. Even though they are North Korea's biggest ally and protector, it shows they still cannot control or know for sure what the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is up to. So there were 5 mysterious forensic cases that baffled experts. Science and forensics have come a long way, but there are still bizarre cases that even the most sophisticated forensic science still have trouble figuring out, just like the ones on this list. If you like this video, then please subscribe to our channel. We have new videos coming out every Wednesday and Saturday night for you to check out. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you soon.